السلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المطهرين المكرمين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من أول يوم ظلمهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. صلى الله عليك سيدي ومولاي يا أبا عبد الله، صلى الله عليك يا ابن رسول الله، يا رحمة الله الواسعة، ويا باب نجاة الأمة، يا عبرة كل مؤمن ومؤمنة، يا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم وهو أحسن القائلين وأصدق الصادقين: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، إنا كفيناك المستهزئين. آمنا بالله، صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the purification of the souls and the enlightenment of the hearts, and for the hastening of the reappearance of the awaited Saviour, Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif, enlighten your souls and the atmosphere with the recitation of salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It caused widespread outrage around the world. Condemnation and anger poured from different corners of the globe. It was one of the first acts of terror that Europe had witnessed in 2015. The attacks on the Charlie Hebdo offices in Paris in early January indeed caused more than 11 individuals to be killed when a couple of terrorists stormed inside the offices and caused outrage. This particular incident indeed drew condemnation from world leaders and from many other individuals, Muslims and non-Muslims. You find that not only were these individuals killed inside the offices of this satirical weekly newspaper that has been publishing for many years in Paris, but also a number of other individuals, including a French police officer who happened to be Muslim and his name was Ahmed. A few days after, 4 other individuals, innocent civilians, were also killed when another individual held them hostage at a supermarket. What we find was this was a series of events in which Muslims and the religion of Islam have been once again put at the forefront of news. Because we know over the last few years the news is full of information or articles regarding Muslims. And some individuals that have hijacked the beautiful religion of Islam and have claimed that their actions are part of the teachings. We find that this particular newspaper indeed used to sell 60,000 copies on a weekly basis before this terrorist act. The week after, it sold 7 million copies around the world. And demonstrations took place in Paris and other places, indeed standing against such an action. What this particular terrorist act brought forward is the discussion surrounding a number of issues. The issues include freedom of speech and the right of expression for people living in Western societies. It also brought forward what? Brought forward the idea of whether Muslims are allowed to depict the Prophet or any other holy individual. In that, what do you find? You find many people came forward on social media to stand in solidarity with the individuals who were killed in Paris by using the hashtag Je suis Charlie. Yes, this was commonly used in order for people to stand together with those individuals. Yet the idea about freedom of speech was discussed extensively in the media and across many different circles. People came forward and said Western values espouse the freedom of individuals to express themselves, importantly to ridicule and mock anyone that they wish. There are no boundaries. This is part and parcel of what? Western values and the liberal teachings of democratic systems in the West. They came forward and they discussed this. You will find, and some of you may have watched the television programs that followed this heinous act and this terrorism that took place, that of course we condemn. You find what happens. Some of them came forward and said, we do not understand. What is the problem when it comes to drawing cartoons that depict the Prophet? Because this particular satirical newspaper was controversial. It published a number of cartoons mocking the Prophet of Islam, Rasul al-A'zam Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Later on, after this incident took place, a few days later, the next edition of Charlie Hebdo was on the front cover, once again, they published a cartoon depicting the Prophet of Islam, which in turn caused outrage in the Muslim world. People here in the West ask this question, what's wrong with mocking? Surely an individual has the right to laugh at any other. This is part and parcel of Western values and what people are accustomed to in a democracy. Yes, this notion was presented. How do you and I respond to this? It's imperative that we are in the position to be able to respond to these ideas and these notions that are presented. The religion of Islam comes forward and categorically states from day one, nothing has changed about this. From day one, there is no such thing, please mark these words. There is no such thing as absolute freedom of expression. Meaning what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, Allamahu al-Bayan. Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, one of the favors and the blessings of the Almighty to each and every human being is what? The ability to express themselves and use the tongue. Yes, to speak. Yet at the same time, the Almighty says what? Inna as-sam'a wal-basara wal-fu'ad kullu ulaika kana anhu mas'oola. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, yes, you are able to speak. Yet for every favor that the Almighty Subhanahu wa Ta'ala has bestowed upon us, there is responsibility. There is accountability. We will be held responsible for what we say. Therefore, what do we say? We say when it comes to freedom of speech, indeed, the human being has a freedom which is relative. And this notion, by the way, is not only confined it to teachings of the religion of Islam. Because today, you look in the Western world and there's clear hypocrisy and double standards. In which way? Please try to understand these examples. You'll find the same newspaper would not publish any cartoons doing what? Ridiculing the Holocaust. It has not done so. Number one. Number two, you find British historians such as David Irving. This individual was persecuted and prosecuted in several countries in Europe for denying the Holocaust. Likewise, there was a social experiment that was presented online that asked this question: if some of those 3 million protesters that went to the street in Paris against this particular terrorist act, if they had lifted a sign, instead of saying Je suis Charlie, they would have said Je suis Sharif. Who is Sharif? One of the criminals, one of those individuals that killed those cartoonists in the office. If they had carried this, what would have happened to them? Definitely they would have been arrested. Definitely people would have turned to them and said, you cannot do this. We find this across the Western world, in America, in the United Kingdom, in Europe. There is what? A limit to what people can come forward and say. It's not that they have the freedom and the what? The green light and an open check to say whatever they wish to say. That's why in 2011 there was a YouGov poll conducted in this country. 82% of the voters said what? Said those individuals who are protesters and are burning the poppies, you know, the poppies that people wear, yes, in November, 82% said they should be prosecuted. They should be imprisoned. Why? Well, they are coming forward and doing what? They are coming forward and insulting a principle or a day in which the majority of people honor those who had fallen in World War I. Therefore, the reality emerges, and that's what? This notion of the absolute freedom of expression and freedom of speech does not in reality exist. It is not only for Muslims to say that, you know, when it comes to the Holy Prophet, and not only Rasulullah, but every Prophet of God and holy individual, those individuals are red lines as far as what? Ridiculing them, laughing at them, depicting them in an unacceptable manner in a satire or in cartoons or in any other way. Number one. Number two, people also ask the question, because what happened, I was reading myself. After this incident, you often get this trend. You find the rise of what we call pseudo-maraja. Yes, pseudo-scholars. You know, and these sometimes happen to be Muslims, sometimes they happen to be Shias, sometimes non-Shias, sometimes non-Muslims. This time it was non-Muslims. Where in newspapers online they used to come up and say, this is not mentioned in the Quran. Where can you find in the Quran that says you cannot have a drawing of the Holy Prophet? Yes, somehow extrapolating and coming with an Islamic law, yes, coming forward and saying that in the religion of Islam, as long as it is not in the Quran, then it is what? It is okay. And you find this discussed in many different circles. Where do we stand as the school of Ahl al-Bayt when it comes to cartoons that draw the Holy Prophet or the Imams or any other prophet like Jesus or any other? Because by the way, when it comes to the Danish newspaper that in 2006 published similar cartoons that ridiculed the Prophet of Islam, they were given cartoons that ridiculed Isa alayhi salam. They refused to publish them. They said that will incite people. Subhanallah. In any case, it's pick and choose, of course. Yet the question arises here, and that is what? And that is, what is the jurisprudential ruling of our scholars as far as drawings are concerned, drawings of the Prophet? Our ulama, they come forward and say, in principle, and please understand this, it is sensitive. In principle, the drawing of individuals, or drawings in general, as long as they are not drawings of anything which is not permissible or haram, or will lead people towards bad actions or sin. So for instance, drawing of a prophet. In principle, it's allowed. Like the acting of a prophet or an imam. Yes? In the television series, in, for instance, any other program, an individual who acts out the position of the prophet or an imam is what? It's permissible. You do not even need to conceal their face. Yes? That's the ruling of the majority of our ulama. Yet here they make a distinction. They say there is a notion of great importance, and that is hatkil hurma. What's hatkil hurma? The violation of the sanctity and the sacredness of these holy individuals. That when it comes to playing them in films, in movies, in series, yes, or drawing them, any such depiction must be done in the most respectful of manner and must not be what? In a way damaging their reputation, attacking them, ridiculing them or mocking them. If that is the outcome of the drawing or the acting, then it is not permissible. Likewise, what do they say? They say when it comes to movies, for instance, if an individual acts out a prophet or an imam, yes, they must be upright in their characteristics in their normal day-to-day life. In other words, they must not be an individual who, God forbid, is a drunkard or is an open sinner, that they have just been hired to act out the personality, this noble personality, this sacred personality. The reality is what? Any drawing that comes forward and does what? That paints an image of these holy individuals in an unacceptable manner is forbidden. Is not part of what? What is permissible in Sharia law. The question is, has this been, or this particular incident of the publication of these cartoons, the first time the Prophet of Islam was ridiculed or mocked, or have we witnessed examples throughout history? Indeed, you only need to pick up a book of the seerah, of the biography, of the life of the greatest human being Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created and will ever create. Al-Rasul al-A'zam Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And you'll come to the conclusion that from day one, when the Prophet of Islam stood to deliver the message, he was attacked. He was labeled. He was referred to using many insults. He was first of all known as what? He was known as a magician. He was known as a sorcerer, as an individual who is majnoon, lost his mind. He was attacked physically. Therefore, what do we find during the life of the Holy Prophet? This was continuous. That's why the Holy Prophet of Islam himself says, مَا أُوذِيَ نَبِيٌّ مِثْلَ مَا أُوذِيتَ. There's no prophet that has been hurt or attacked like how I have been. Clear, explicit statement as narrated by Rasulullah. Later on, what do we find? Orientalist, Alexander Dupont, for instance, yes? Or John from Damascus. These two individuals were one of the earlier Orientalists that came forward and attacked the personality of Rasulullah. What do they do? For example, John of Damascus would come forward and say, Muhammad is an imposter who used to have a bird sit on his shoulder and whisper things to him, and he used to feed that bird. And these whisperings were the revelation that he came and presented to the people. Likewise, we find this particular trend of the attack of the Holy Prophet even has continued until modern day. Yes, you have from the publication of the book Satanic Verses by this individual, Salman al-Rushdie, towards what? Towards the cartoons that were published by the Danish newspaper, towards the remarks made by the previous Pope that said what? That said Islam spread through the sword and talked negatively about the Holy Prophet. And indeed, what we find was the production of this movie known as Innocence of Muslims, and many other that came forward to attack the personality of the Holy Prophet. Likewise, today books have been written. Yes, people like Pat Robinson in the United States, very well-known Islamophobe, who comes forward and what? And tries to incite hatred against the Muslims. People like Robert Spencer, who's authored the book. What is the book called? Muhammad, the founder of the world's most intolerant religion, and many other books. Yes, attacking the personality of the Holy Prophet. What do we find? We find this is not the first time. In other words, history has recorded many attempts by individuals to tarnish and to assassinate the character of our great Prophet. Indeed, they have failed. Categorically, they have not reached their objective and in their aim. Because today we find the most followed individual, the most loved individual, the most honored individual, the individual that is causing the greatest influence and the most profound transformation in the world is no other than Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Yet the question you might have is, the Prophet of Islam, all these years from the beginning of the revelation till now, has been attacked. Yes? Who was perhaps the first or amongst the first who could be considered to be the defender of Rasulullah, who stood to protect the sanctity and the sacredness of Rasulullah, who stood to what? In the face of those who were hurting him, in the face of those who were abusing him. You come to history and you find it was a lady. This was his daughter, Fatima Zahra, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayha. From a young age, this great daughter of the Holy Prophet stands what? When the Prophet of Islam is in prostration and performing prayers, she does what? She takes away the dirt that the Prophet of Islam has been hit with. She stands to protect him when he is abused and the stones are hurled at him. She, of course, and Amir al-Mu'mineen. But when you come and examine, after the martyrdom of the Holy Prophet, not only was Sayyida Fatima the first martyr from the Ahl al-Bayt after Rasulullah, but she was the first defender of the Prophet of Islam after the great messenger. In which way? You all know that when it came to demanding the right of her husband, the legitimate right that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him, likewise when it came to the land of Fadak and calling for her land to be returned back to her, Sayyidatun Nisa stood out when it came to what? Speaking against oppression and injustice. In which way? We are told that the khutbah known as al-Khutbatul Fadakiyya today is one of the most outstanding pieces of Arabic literature, and it demonstrates the eloquence, the valor, the strength of Sayyidatun Nisa Fatima Zahra salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayha. The narrations tell us what? This great lady, her right was taken away. In which way? That in the year 7th after Hijrah, the Prophet of Islam was given the land of Fadak by the Jews as fay. Meaning what? Meaning that he did not have to fight for it. It did not involve any military warfare. These people came forward and said to the Prophet, you can take it. Fadak is for you. A vast land, several kilometers out of Medina. The Prophet of Islam is then what? Revealed to by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through Jibreel that this land should be given to Fatima as an honor for the sacrifice of her mother Khadijatul Kubra salawatullahi wa salamu alayha. And the Prophet of Islam indeed obliges. He gives this land to Fatima Zahra, and she has her own workers in that land during the life of the Holy Prophet. Of course, what happens is very well known for people, that after the Prophet of Islam leaves this world, after he departs, this land is usurped by the ruling establishment, by the first Khalifa, from the Holy Lady. She comes to speak in this most beautiful of sermons. In which way does she speak? In which manner does she come and speak? If you refer to the riwayat, it states that she came forward to Masjidun Nabawi, which at that time is the equivalent today, equivalent of the modern media. The media that people follow, so to speak, and listen to. On her way, they noticed how she approached this particular announcement or the delivery of this sermon. The narrations tell us that the hijab that Fatima Zahra alayhi salam was wearing was characterized by the fact that it was so loose, it was long, that she was pulling it with her. Yes, they made this comment that the hijab of Fatima Zahra was this particular hijab an important message for our sisters and our brothers too, because believe me, the number of emails and messages people like me get of our sisters complaining of their brothers, their fathers, their husbands, telling them, why do you have to wear hijab? Why do you have to adorn it in a particular way? Why do you have to go out with no makeup? Why is it that your hijab is not tight? And so on and so forth. Yes, as we honor this particular lady, it's an important reminder, because this idea, this notion of the Islamic dress code of modesty and chastity indeed ensures that our sisters are the ambassadors of the religion of Islam. They attain reward when they adorn the hijab of Fatima and the hijab of the Quran, and they need the support of their what? Of their male relatives, no doubt, yes? This is how we honor Fatima Zahra. It hurts us when we continuously hear of stories and incidents where some of our sisters in our community are taking their hijab off. Why? There's something wrong. Are we not doing something that we're supposed to? It hurts us when we hear and sometimes we see the values that Fatima was martyred for, that Sayyida Zainab sacrificed everything for in Karbala, are today being what? Filtered and somehow diluted when it comes to the hijab. That when it comes to this principle, we are taking it lightly. We are not adhering to it the way it should be. And this involves, of course, social hijab and hijab online. For brothers and sisters, no doubt, yes, as far as the package that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has presented for you and I when it comes to modesty and chastity, that ensures that you and I are on the right path and keep our spirituality the level that the Almighty subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to. Indeed, in this particular difficult circumstances that we are going through. But what did Fatima Zahra? Indeed, when she came, when she spoke out, do you know what she says? And this is very relevant today. She comes, she says during the famous sermon, she said, أيها الناس اعلموا أني فاطمة وأن أبي محمد. O people, know that I am Fatima and my father is Rasulullah. That's why today, when we honor this great lady and when we honor Rasulullah, we state, Je suis Fatima, Je suis Muhammad, and Je suis the Ahl al-Bayt. Indeed, when we recall these particular holy names, we're standing in their honor. Why? Especially Fatima Zahra. When I ask you to identify a group of people or a family, you speak about the head or an important member of that family that demonstrates the purity, the sacredness of that family. Look at Hadith al-Kisa. When the question is posed, وَمَنْ تَحْتُ الْكِسَاء, who are under this cloak? The answer is given, هُمْ فَاطِمَةَ وَأَبُوهَا وَبَعْلُهَا وَبَنُوهَا. It is Fatima, her father, her husband and her children. She is considered to be the axis of the identification of the Ahl al-Bayt. Peace and blessings be upon them. That's why the dua says, Allahumma inni as'aluka bi Fatima wa abiha wa ba'liha wa baniha wa sirr al-mustawda'i fiha. She occupies such a prominent position. And when she stands to say, know that I am Fatima, and I never say anything except the truth. You all know that Fatima Zahra is part of those individuals who categorically in the Holy Quran has been mentioned that the Almighty has protected them and thoroughly cleansed them in Ayatul Tathir. إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. Quite clearly this is reminded to the people. But if you were to examine the sermon, you'll find that in so many places she reminds them about the teachings of Rasulullah. She says to them, if you want to know who Muhammad is, I tell you. Because the Quran was revealed in my house, many of the verses. Because Rasulullah had this relationship with Fatima Zahra. And therefore, she stands to dispel many misconceptions and myths about the Holy Prophet. One of them was what? They came forward and said, the Prophet said, we prophets, we do not inherit. Yes, there is no inheritance when it comes to the prophets. They are excluded from leaving that which they own to their inheritors. She came forward and said, do you think you know and can interpret the Quran more than us? Let me tell you, what about what? وَوَرِثَ سُلَيْمَانُ دَاوُودَ. Did not Sulaiman inherit Dawood? She says, you are talking about the Quran. I give you evidence from the Holy Quran that the prophets indeed do inherit. In this is an established fact. She says to the people, you claim that the prophets are excluded from this honor? Tell me, where is it in the Quran that it's excluded? Only one individual, and that was the first caliph who came forward and said, I heard this hadith. That's it. No one else narrated this hadith. That so-called the prophet said, we prophets do not inherit what we have in our possession. Number one. And number two, of course, Fadak was not inheritance. Fadak was owned by Fatima Zahra in the life of the Holy Prophet. But she goes on to give evidence in order to awaken the conscience of the people. And that's why she stands today as a role model and an exemplary individual for you and I to face this barrage of attacks against our beloved Prophet and how we should respond. Being the first defender of Rasulullah after his martyrdom, Sayyida Fatima Zahra indeed is an exemplary individual. Let me just discuss a number of important issues when it comes to the misconceptions that exist today about the Holy Prophet. Because there are two things that we need to keep in mind. Number one, our knowledge and understanding and the way we respond to these ideas that are spread throughout society about the beautiful personality of Rasulullah. Number one. Number two, the way we conduct ourselves and represent Rasulullah and the Ahl al-Bayt as Muslims. These two notions are critical for us to appreciate when it comes to examining what? The defense of the Holy Prophet, when it comes to the attacks that he is being what? Confronted, and his personality is being subjected to. When you look at this notion, what do you find? The first thing that strikes you is what? That the school of Ahl al-Bayt, brothers and sisters, and please pay attention to this point. The school of Ahl al-Bayt, we have no doubt and are not shy to say and have evidence to present that there is no school today within the Islamic Ummah that defends and stands to exonerate the Holy Prophet from all the misconceptions and all the accusations like the school of Ahl al-Bayt. That it looks at Rasulullah like no other Muslim school of thought. You say to me, how? I say to you, there are so many examples that unfortunately are found in the books of Muslims out there that sadly depict the Holy Prophet in many ways that leaves a lot to be desired. And it hurts us. And we have to speak about it in the hope that Muslims wake up and re-scrutinize the books of hadith to be able to say, no, there is no way that we can show the Prophet of Islam in such a way. No doubt, there is barrage of attacks outside the religion of Islam, but sometimes we need to look at ourselves from within, yes? That the healing must start from within our own circles. When I say our own circles, I say the Muslim Ummah. Let's give a number of examples. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you may be asked about this, because this is commonly believed and spread. And people like Robert Spencer, if you read his book, this particular vile book, that attacks the personality of the Holy Prophet, many of what I'm going to say he refers to. And he's taking it from some books of hadith. Number one, yes, some of these require their own examination, but I just mention the important parts about it and I leave it for you to go and research. What's one of the controversies and misconceptions about the Holy Prophet? What's found in the Holy Quran. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alam nashrah laka sadrak. Yes? This famous chapter of the Holy Quran, Surah Al-Inshirah. Many of our Muslim brothers, they came forward, and this is found in Sahih Muslim, it's found in many books, Bukhari and others, and at least 9 occasions I found it in the Sahih books. They say this is the story of the Prophet. In 5 times throughout his life. How many? 5 times, yes? 5 times, Jibreel has to descend on the earth and perform a surgical operation on the chest of the Holy Prophet, opening up his chest and taking up a piece of thread that exists in his heart, putting it in Zamzam and taking up his heart out, yes, putting it in Zamzam, returning back his heart, and stitching it back again. The narrations tell us it happened when he was 3, when he was 10, when he was 40, when he went on the Isra and the Mi'raj, and the 5th, I don't know. Not that I don't know, the narrations say we don't know. Yes, they say on 5 occasions, this is what they interpret as Alam nashrah laka sadrak. They say inshirah al-sadr is what? Is the carving out, opening of the chest. They say why? Because the shaitan had placed this thread inside the heart of the Prophet and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to cleanse him. And this is ridiculed by the non-believers, the Islamophobes, the ones who are pointing the finger at the Holy Prophet. They say, can you imagine Muslims following an individual who has to go through what? And is waiting on the NHS surgery line, you know? And we're waiting for some operation for his heart to be opened 5 times throughout his life, to be washed from the threads that the shaitan has put. And it poses a number. The school of Ahl al-Bayt categorically rejects these narrations. There is no scope for acceptance of anything like this whatsoever. It's insulting to the personality of the Holy Prophet. It's insulting to the notion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen the final and the greatest of His messengers. Why should a thread for 5 times be taken out? Why should the heart of the Prophet be washed physically? If, for instance, there was something and we don't believe there was, because the heart of the Prophet is pure, and Allah says, I revealed the Quran into your heart. Yet if, for instance, why would Jibreel need to wash it? Yes? Why would he need... And how did the shaitan have access to the heart of the Prophet? How did he get inside? All these questions that don't make any sense whatsoever. Yet they exist in the books of hadith. Yes? Likewise, what do we find? We find the notion of the revelation. Throughout the life of the Holy Prophet, these are stations for us to reflect upon. The notion of the wahi, the revelation. What do we find? We find in the books of hadith, sadly, that are followed by many Muslims, what do they say? They say the Prophet of Islam, when he first received the revelation from Jibreel, had no idea who this was. To the extent that he was about to suffocate, that Jibreel held him so hard that he was unable to breathe. When he finished, when Jibreel read the first few verses of the Holy Quran, اقرأ بسم ربك الذي خلق, what happened? They say the Prophet of Islam came, saw Khadija, said, I don't know whether this is revelation or the jinn. Yes? What happens? Jibreel, the Prophet of Islam says, I don't know whether this is from God or some whisperings from the jinn. Yes? Khadija, salamullahi alayha, according to these unacceptable riwayat, it is mentioned that Khadija says to him, I have a litmus test. I can tell you whether it was the angel or whether it was the jinn. He says, okay, what should we do? She says, come and sit next to me on my thighs. Yes? If you sit on my thighs and I have my hijab on, yes? Do you still see that particular being that is about to give you a revelation or not? He says, I see it. She then takes off her hijab. She says, do you see it? He says, no, I don't see it. She says, it's a malaika. Since when were the malaika not approaching human beings when people are not in hijab? Otherwise, our sisters are having a very easy life. Since when this is the case? Yes? And you know this particular clip? It is used, or this story, it's used in the film Innocence of Muslims. It is used. For those people who have seen the 14-minute part of this clip, it is used. Exactly this. And it is found where? In many of the books of hadith. What else do we find? We find this man, Robert Spencer, placing a lot of emphasis, and others like this individual, John of Damascus, talking about the story of Zainab bint Jahsh. What is the story of Zainab bint Jahsh? The Quran speaks about the story of the individual known as Zayd ibn Haritha, whom the Prophet of Islam was gifted by his devoted wife, Khadijatul Kubra salamullahi alayha. Yes? She had this slave by the name of Zayd. She presented him to the Prophet. The Prophet of Islam freed him. Later on, adopted him as his son. And he had a choice to join his family, and he declined and chose to stay with the Prophet. When he decided to stay with the Prophet of Islam encouraged him to get married. And what? Supported him to get married with Zainab bint Jahsh, his cousin, the Prophet's cousin. Yes? Zainab bint Jahsh was from an aristocratic family. She was what? An individual who Zayd got married to. Yet after, for example, approximately a year, their relationship would not work. They had problems. And Zayd many a times would come to the Prophet to request what? To request that the Prophet somehow divorces him from Zainab. But the Prophet would say, no, keep working at your relationship. Yes? The fabricated story that is found in many books of tafsir, which the school of Ahl al-Bayt, and specifically our Imam Zayn al-Abidin al-Sajjad, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, has refuted, is what? This is the fabricated story. That when Zayd kept telling the Prophet, I don't want to live with Zainab, the Prophet goes to see Zainab. But what? He as soon as stands outside the door, somehow it's a curtain and not a door, and it's blown by the wind. The Prophet looks at Zainab and becomes what? And becomes enchanted. Ma'adallah. He falls in love with Zainab, yes, and comes back. Now Zayd says, I want to get divorced. He says, fine, so that I get married to her. And what do they say? This John and others like Robert Spencer, what do they say? They come forward and say, they say that Muhammad was a womanizer. He was a man who had lustful intentions. Yes? And he wanted that particular lady, and therefore he made his adopted son divorce her so that he would marry her. And today, unfortunately, this has found its way in many books of hadith. The school of Ahl al-Bayt says this is insulting to the Holy Prophet. The Quran says, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَىٰ خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. The Quran says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا يَنطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ. The Prophet of Islam is ma'soom from birth till the end of his life, until he left this world. There would be no way that the Prophet of Islam would undertake and perform anything that is remotely something like this. Yes? How do we respond? We say, look at the hadith of the Ahl al-Bayt. The hadith of the Ahl al-Bayt quite categorically denounce any form of the Prophet looking at Zainab. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had informed the Prophet, has said to him, one day you will marry Zainab bint Jahsh. And the Prophet knew that this would happen. He would continuously stress to Zayd, work on your marriage, determine, strengthen the relationship. But indeed, they were not able to do so. And finally, Zayd, what? Decided to divorce his wife. And later, in order to establish a law, to legislate a law, because back in Arab time, or the time of Jahiliyyah, what did they used to say? They used to say, if your adopted son is married to someone and later on they divorce, you are not permitted to marry their ex-wife. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to what? Wanted to establish a law that it is permissible, and therefore he commanded the Prophet of Islam to marry Zainab bint Jahsh. There is absolutely no lustful intentions or anything else involved whatsoever. But it determines where you look for your what? Where you look for your sources. Likewise, what do we find? This is very important, and I would like to request your attention here, because it is a matter of dispute, and today many people ask this question. They say, how many wives did the Holy Prophet have? Narrations say 13, 15. At least when the Prophet of Islam left this world, he had 9. They say, why? And therefore, those individuals who like to attack the personality of Rasulullah, they come forward and say, he's a womanizer. How can an individual marry so many women? Without understanding the historical context of these particular marriages. You look at them and you begin to appreciate why the Prophet of Islam had so many wives, so to speak. You find the fact that some of them, like Salama, were what? Were widows. Ladies who had no one to protect them. They were alone in Medina. Therefore, the Prophet of Islam, out of his compassion and the fact that they had children. Yes? It was not that they were so young, they were all virgins or ladies who had not married before. But some of them were what? Some of them were widows. Yes? Some of them were widows that the Prophet of Islam had married due to the compassion, due to the love that he wanted to what? Establish and encourage and inculcate in people's hearts. Yes? Number one, you find other examples like Maria al-Qibtiyya and others. They were taken as slaves. Yes? And the Prophet of Islam wanted to do what? Wanted to free them, wanted to help them, wanted to introduce the religion of Islam to them. Therefore he married them. The other reasons are what? The other reasons are that the Prophet of Islam at that time, it was a very much tribalistic society. Everything was regarding tribes. In order to establish strong tribes and tribal relations, people had to intermarry. We have examples of the Holy Prophet of Islam getting married to a certain number of his wives for political reasons. Remember, the Prophet of Islam lived a very simple lifestyle. Anyone today who is a so-called, ma'adallah, as they have called the Prophet, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us for saying these words, but they call the Prophet a playboy. Yes, today a playboy, what do they say? They say a playboy today has what kind of a lifestyle? Has a lifestyle which is lavish. Have a lifestyle which is full of what? Extravagance, yes? When they are with many different women. Yet the Prophet of Islam, look at his personality. A simple lifestyle. Ascetic. Many a times he would not have any food to eat. The narrations tell us that one day he had not eaten for people discovered he had not eaten for 3 days. The fact that he had some stones and he had rubbed it on his holy abdomen, his holy stomach, he had rubbed it, yes? And his beloved daughter Fatima Zahra, when was this? During the digging of the Khandaq, in the battle of the trench. She comes to him, presents him with some bread and says, "Oh my father, this is food and the bread that I had baked today for my family. But I heard that you have not eaten." He replies to her, "Yes, my daughter, that food has not entered the mouth of your father for 3 days." This was Rasulullah, who had no desire for this world whatsoever. You need to look at all these aspects within the what? Within the historical context, within the seerah and the life of the Holy Prophet of Islam, peace and blessings be upon him and his holy progeny. What else do you find? They come forward and attack his personality by saying that he had disregard for people who were weaker and somehow disabled in society. Where do they look to? They look to chapter 80, Surah Abasa wa Tawalla. Yes, the Quran says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Abasa wa Tawalla an ja'ahu al-A'ma. I came to examine the books of tafsir of the Muslims. Yes, I did not find a single book of tafsir which were from non-Ahl al-Bayt Mufassirin who came forward and did not say that this individual who frowned and looked away when there was a blind man by the name of Abdullah ibn Maktoum entered the place where the Prophet of Islam was, they all come forward and say the man who turned away and frowned and was unhappy because he saw a blind man enter because he was trying to spread the message, they categorically say Ijma'ul Muslimin, they say it was the Prophet. They say, and Allah rebuked him. وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ لَعَلَّهُ يَزَّكَّى. They say that the Quran says to the Prophet, how could you turn away and frown? You know, maybe he wants purification. He's come to ask you for guidance. Only the school of Ahl al-Bayt has come forward and said, this individual can never be Rasulullah. Why? Because when it comes to the chronology of the revelation of the ayat, before the chapter Abasa or these ayat was revealed, another important ayah was revealed, and that is what? وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. You have the most sublime morals and etiquettes and conduct. How can Allah say to the Prophet that you have the highest standards of morality, yet at the same time the Prophet of Islam would frown and turn away from a blind man who is a believer? How could this happen? How can anyone accept this? In the most rational of ways, we cannot accept this and so many other misconceptions that exist regarding the personality and the character and the conduct of the Holy Prophet of Islam. We reject the narration that state that he wanted to commit suicide 3 times. That exists sadly. And we say it for academic reasons and not attacking any personality. But they exist in Sahih al-Bukhari that for 3 occasions the Prophet of Islam stands on Ghar Hira when he was unsure whether it was revelation or not and wanted to throw himself off the cliff. And Jibreel would come to him and say, Ya Rasulullah, you are a messenger of God, don't do this. Yes? And he returns and once again attempts to do so and he returns, Yes, on 3 times. And the enemies of God pounce on this particular narration. One day I said to one of my brothers, I said, my brother, as Muslims, we need to stand and look at how we indeed admire the personality of the Holy Prophet. How do we look at this personality? Did you know that these narrations exist? Don't tell me there are books that are sahih. How can I accept these books that you refer to as sahih when they have these particular narrations in them? And the response was what? You know what, brother, I am happy and I will consider it a sahih. I say, why? He said, at least he didn't commit suicide. Allahu Akbar. You're willing to accept the narration that the Prophet, God forbid, wanted to throw himself from the cliff so that you what? You keep this so-called acceptance of these sahih books. This is blind following. This is not the teachings of the Holy Quran that invites us to ponder and reflect, that invites us to understand and admire the position of the Holy Prophet of Islam. That's number 1. Number 2, very briefly, we have to ask ourselves a question. As defenders of the Holy Prophet and Fatima Zahra and the Ahl al-Bayt, as ambassadors of these holy individuals, where do we stand? Today, you and I, when it comes to the Holy Prophet, there is a great responsibility. He and the Ahl al-Bayt are waiting for you and I to rise to the challenge. Yes, people are hungry. They want to understand whom is the Holy Prophet of Islam, whom are the Ahl al-Bayt, who is Fatima Zahra, peace and blessings be upon her. It is indeed encouraging that we see these wonderful initiatives by the brothers and sisters, such as distribution of flowers with the hadith of the Holy Prophet. Yes, such as websites that attempt to introduce the beautiful mannerism and the akhlaq of the Holy Prophet. And whatever other scheme out there, yes, but there is so much more to be done in a society that allows you to do what? To disseminate the teachings of the Holy Prophet and the Ahl al-Bayt. My dear brothers and sisters, to defend the Holy Prophet is not to change our Facebook statuses only, but to understand his status. Yes? When it comes to defending the honor of the Holy Prophet, it is not about changing our profile pictures on social media, but about changing ourselves to be honorable followers of the Holy Prophet and the Ahl al-Bayt. It's about appreciating the message of the Holy Prophet, the akhlaq of the Holy Prophet, the Quran that the Prophet of Islam has brought forward. Indeed, by memorizing it, by understanding it, by following it. Yes? And being individuals who defend the honor and the sanctity of Rasulullah and the Ahl al-Bayt, especially as we are bombarded with this so-called Shia phobia and the indiscriminate slaughtering of the Shias around the world for anything else, for no other reason other than wilayah of the Ahl al-Bayt. What do? We are to stand as individuals who are not just reactive, but proactive. Yes? Individuals who recognize that what? Who recognize our duties and responsibilities as the followers of the Ahl al-Bayt, that indeed, may Allah bless the brothers and sisters who hold majalis. Yesterday, an individual told me, why do you have to hold majalis of Fatima Zahra? For what? On 3 different occasions, because we have 3 different riwayat for the martyrdom of Fatima Zahra. And this has something that some people have asked before, and including some of our scholars like Sayyid ibn Tawus, Radwanullahi ta'ala alayh. He said, I want to find out the exact date of the martyrdom of Sayyidatun Nisa. He would research in the books and so on. Yet one day in his dream, he saw this great lady who said to him, is it so much for my lovers, for those who follow me, to remember my masa'ib on these 3 occasions? Is it so difficult? Yes? Does not the remembrance of Fatima and the Ahl al-Bayt illuminate the hearts? Gives us this inspiration to look up to them and to what? And to emulate them? Indeed, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless the brothers and sisters who work so hard to establish these majalis in honor of the Ahl al-Bayt. These brothers and sisters are what? Are volunteers. Yet like anything else, it requires the support of the community. This remembrance of the Ahlul Bayt needs to be kept alive, brothers and sisters. This is not some responsibility for the ulama of a few organizers. Each and every one of us needs to ensure that these organizations are supported financially. It is not only for the rich, by the way, to donate. Yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Ahlul Bayt indeed are happy and are pleased even with those who are able to donate towards these majalis and their establishment, even if it is the smallest of amounts, not only through donations but by moral support, by giving whatever they can, and by ensuring that the light of Ali Muhammad continues. You know why? Because there was a sustained attempt to not only ridicule the Prophet, not only attack Rasulullah, but the Ahlul Bayt alayhum as-salam. And do you know when it started? It started when the Prophet of Islam was on his deathbed. Somebody stands and said, "Innahu la yahjur." That man, the Prophet of Islam, is delirious. He's lost his mind. And indeed, what happens? Continuously after that, the injustice against the Ahlul Bayt alayhum as-salam continues, to the extent that his beloved daughter Fatima Zahra wants to weep for Rasulullah, wants to cry for her beloved father. They complain to Amir al-Mu'mineen. They say, "We don't want your wife to cry for Rasulullah. Her tears are upsetting us and annoying us. Tell her to stop." Amir al-Mu'mineen does not tell Fatima Zahra to stop. He knows the values of the tears of Fatima. Yes? What does he do? He builds a house for Fatima, a small room for Fatima, so that Fatima Zahra would be able to shed her tears in remembrance of the memory of her father, Rasulullah. And what kind of calamities befell upon Fatima Zahra. May Allah bless the poets. May Allah bless those individuals who allow us to recall the musibah of Fatima. Listen to these words that the poet says about Fatima and the madhlumiyya of Sayyidatun Nisa. He says, "Inna hadith al-bab dhu shujuni mimma bihi janat yadul kha'uni ayuhjamu al-qawm ala bayt al-huda ayahjamu al-qawm ala bayt al-huda wa mahbat al-wahyi wa muntada." He says, this story of the door, and what shall I tell you about the door, is a story that breaks the heart. It's a story that shatters the heart of every human being. He says, would this door that was honored by Rasulullah be attacked and fire set next to it? أَتُضْرَمُ النَّارِ بِبَابِ دَارِهَا وَآيَةُ النُّورِ على منارها ما اكتسبوا بالنار غير العار ومن ورائه عذاب النار. Indeed, by setting the house and the door of Fatima Zahra alight, what awaits them? The fire of Jahannam. Then he says, لكن رد الأضلع الزكية رزية ما مثلها رزية. Yet the crushing of the crushing of the ribs of Fatima is a musibah like no other musibah. وإن كسر الضلع ليس ينجبر إلا بصمصام عزيز مقتدر ومن نبوع الدم من جنبيها يعرف عظم ما جرى عليها لقد جنى الجاني على جنينها فاندكت الجبال من حنينها. This wretched man, what did he do when he pushed the door? Her cries, the heavens, the mountains crumbled. When the Lady of Light cried out, wa Muhammad wa abata, فالباب والجدار والدماء شهود صدق ما بها خفاء ولا تسني خبر المسمار سل صدرها خزانة الأسرار. Do not ask me about the news of the nail. Speak to the chest of Fatima. The chest of Fatima shall tell you about the nail and the extent of the penetration. But they did not only injure Fatima this way. He says وجاوزوا الحد بلطم الخد شلت يد الطغيان والتعدي. Fatima Zahra, it is as if she speaks to her father. What does she say? يا بويا كل قلب حالي يكسر عصرني العدو بالباب عصره كسر ضلعي وسطرني شلون سطره غدا من هالنهار بعيني ظلمه يا بويا وطاح من جور العلية جنيني وطحت ما ظل حيل بيا وعلي منك مكتف بالوصية وحسين وحسن وحسين يتباكون يم ابويا لما صارت وهجموا على الدار وقاموا يحرقون الباب بالنار لذت بي وجرح صدري المسمار وجنيني طاح مني ويست منه. الله أكبر. This is the alam. هذه آلام فاطمة الزهراء. She suffered in silence. She would go through the pain until the narrations tell us her final days in this life, in this world. She was so thin. She had lost so much weight. It was the final day of her life. She came, there was no one in the house. She looked at Asma. She said, Asma, I'm going to go in the room. I'm going to recite the Holy Quran. If you find that I have stopped the recitation, know that I have left this world. Know that I have departed from this world. Asma sits outside the room. Ajarakum Allah. Fatima Zahra is inside. She is facing the Qibla. She is reciting the Quran. All of a sudden, the voice of Fatima stops. Asma calls her, Ya bint Muhammad, Ya Fatima Zahra, Ajibini. Oh, the daughter of Muhammad, why is it that I've no longer able to hear your voice? Answer me. She enters inside the room and finds that Fatima has left this world. Allahu Akbar. Fatima Zahra leaves with this world all alone. She comes and throws herself on the body of Fatima. She crawls out, Wa Fatimata, Wa Sayyidata, Wa Maghlumata. Imam al-Hassan al-Hussein, they were in the mosque of the Holy Prophet. Now they come inside the house. They want to see their mother. They look at Asma. Ayna ummuna Fatima. Tell us, where is our mother Fatima? Asma doesn't say anything. Her head is down. They rush to the room. They enter the room. What do they see inside the room? They see the mother Fatima lying. The cover is covering her face. They rush towards her. Fatima, Ummah, Ajibini, answer me, Fatima. Al-Hassan says, Ummah, ana waladik al-Hassan. لقد قطعتني قلبي. You have shattered my veins of my heart. Hussein looks at her and says, Mother Fatima, I am Hussein. Allahu Akbar. Now what do? They leave the house. They go to the mosque. They see the people. They are crying. They cry out, Allahu Akbar. لقد ماتت أمنا فاطمة. The cries and the wails can be heard all across the city of Medina. In the mosque of the Prophet was Amir al-Mu'mineen. The narration says as soon as he heard this, he collapsed onto the ground. He had lost Rasulullah, now he has lost Fatima Zahra. Allahu Akbar. Amir al-Mu'mineen had to wash the body of Fatima Zahra. She had told him, "Oh Abul Hassan, wash my body using my clothes, bury me at night, do not allow those that have oppressed me to take part in my funeral, recite the Quran for me." Asma says, when Ali ibn Abi Talib was washing the body of Fatima, all of a sudden Ali sits on the corner of the room. She says, "I saw Ali ibn Abi Talib crying profusely. I said to him, 'Ali, ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, why is it that you stopped washing the body of your wife Fatima?' He says to her, 'Asma, when I was running the water, I came across the broken ribs of Fatima Zahra. I came across the ribs that she had not told me about. How can my wife Fatima suffer in silence in this way?'" Allahu Akbar. When the washing was finished, the shrouding had been completed, he calls out, "Ta'alaw, come, O Hassan, O Hussein, O Zainab, O Kulthum, waddi'u ammakum Fatima Zahra." These were the final moments. Al-Hassan comes, Al-Hussein, they are now surrounding their mother Fatima. They come and cuddle, they hug their mother Fatima. "Ummah Fatima, what do we do after you? You have made us orphans." At that moment, Al-Hassan is on his mother Fatima's chest. Al-Hussein is hugging his mother's body. The narration says that Fatima extended her hands. She lapped her hands around them. It was as if to say, "My sons, this is the farewell from me to you." At that moment, nada munadin min as-sama, "Ya علي يا علي ارفع هؤلاء عن جسد والدتهما فلقد أبكيا ملائكة السماء." Oh Ali, the malaika, the angels are not able to see Fatima being hugged by Al-Hassan, Al-Hussein. They are weeping and crying. This is not something that they are able to witness. ساعد الله قلبك يا صاحب الزمان. If the angels cannot see Hussein on the chest of Fatima, how did they see Shimr sit on the chest of Aba Abdullah? لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا آل محمد أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. نسألك اللهم وندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم، يا الله يا الله يا الله يا الله يا الله يا الله، إلهي بفاطمة وأبيها وبعلها وبنيها والسر المستودع فيها، يا الله تقبل منا هذا القليل برحمتك الواسعة. اللهم ارزقنا زيارة الحسين في الدنيا وشفاعة الحسين في الآخرة. اللهم انتقم من أعداء الزهراء، عجل لوليك الفرج، اجعلنا من أعمانه وأنصاره ومن المستشهدين بين يديه. اللهم تقبل منا هذا القليل. المؤسسون لهذا المجلس الشريف تقبل اللهم أعمالهم، احشرهم مع محمد وآل محمد، ترحم على أمواتهم. وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات، رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة تسبقها صلوات.